Hello everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel, and this is going to be the second part of my COVID-19 series. I'm so sorry this is going to be super late, I already know, but I already recorded this video once, so I'm going to have to do it again because there was an issue with my computer and I lost all the footage and I couldn't transfer some of the footage to my computer for some reason. It was just not working out, so I'm just going to have to do this all over again. And I'm so sorry, I have no idea when I'm going to be able to edit this, but I hope I can put it out soon. So yeah, let's just get into it. As I said on the previous video, I'm going to be talking more about the world's economy on this video and how it was affected and how we can improve it in the future and what are the governments doing right now to make the economy not be so impacted as it could be. So yeah, let's get into it. So as soon as this pandemic started to be felt around the world, comparisons started to be made with other pandemics and epidemics, such as the 1918 global influenza that killed around 40 million people, the SARS outbreak that occurred between 2002 and 2003, and the Ebola outbreak that occurred between 2013 and 2016. However, such comparisons need to be made very carefully because circumstances are very different today, as we know, especially the role of China in the world's economy, because they are now the largest manufacturer and exporter in the world. And even if you just look back to the 2000s, China is not nearly where it was today. China is a country that evolved economically very fast, and they are now one of the top countries in terms of money and richness. So it's very different the way the world is going to be affected because of that. Due to what happened, the Global Trade Organization expects the global trade to fall down by 32% this year, which is quite a lot. And it was very evident right away that the countries that relied more on tourism would be the countries that would suffer the most. I will leave a graph that explains the importance of tourism in several different countries, and as you can see, Portugal, where I live, is right in second place, so we do rely a lot on tourism, and our economy has suffered a lot because of it. And right away, tourism started being affected even when this pandemic was only present in China, because Chinese tourists are known for being the biggest spenders. So tourism in general took a big wave right away, even if we, people that were just working and getting on with our lives, couldn't tell. I will also insert a graph right here that shows the impact that an epidemic had on tourism during the times that epidemic occurred or that outbreak occurred. And it's very interesting. I don't think tourism has ever been this affected before. So studies are definitely going to have to be made in the future to prevent tourism being affected so much if we never want this to happen again. So as we know, the travel industry started to be really affected because flights were being canceled and the way we could move around the world was being restricted. And right away, the travel industry lost $200 million because of these restrictions. The aviation industry lost around $113 million, and it is predicted that this sector will lose in total $820 million. So that is quite a lot. So the UN WTO projected a 20% to 30% decline in international arrivals in 2020, which can be translated in a loss for the tourism sector between $300 billion to $450 billion. However, the WTTC projected a 2.1 trillion loss, which is quite a margin of difference there. So airlines, casinos, cruises, restaurants around the world, they lost their activity by 90%, which is a lot. And around the world, it is predicted that so far between 100 to 120 million people have lost their jobs only in this sector, which is pretty crazy. As we know, some restaurants started to adapt by doing takeaway services, which is really cool. We did see a lot of services and a lot of companies wanting to reinvent themselves to not get so affected by this pandemic, which is always great to see. Some companies, for example, started to make ventilators, or other companies started to make PPE, which is really important because we've seen at some point there was lack of PPE for the medical professionals in the hospitals to treat people. So this was really important as well. I also remember seeing on the news a factory here in Portugal started to make hand sanitizer, which is also really good. This was like right in the beginning where there was no hand sanitizer anywhere and the prices were through the roof. So it's always helpful and amazing to see these companies reinvent themselves in these hard times. As we know, the sports industry also suffered a lot. The Olympic Games were postponed, the European was postponed, and millions were lost, just like in all other sectors. We have seen so far football is back in the game, but with no one cheering on and no one on the balconies, which is pretty sad to see, but it's better than nothing. And yeah, obviously the sports industry is really complicated as well. There's a lot of money involved in it, so obviously a lot of money was lost as well. The events industry is also a sector that lost a lot. Weddings were postponed, and other events that were scheduled were postponed. So that's really sad to see. A lot of jobs, particularly, were lost in this sector as well. Music concerts were also cancelled, festivals, that was a big part of it. And a lot of controversial thoughts have been rising lately because, for example, here in Portugal, I don't know if it's the same thing in other countries, you can go now see some plays or some theater related subjects, and certain concerts are allowed, but festivals are not back again. And some people say it's not fair. Tell me what you think about it. I'm really not sure where I stand with it. But yeah, let me know down below what you think about it. So the social distancing measure was one of the first to be implemented in order to combat this pandemic. It was first introduced on the 23rd of January in China. And since then, it has had the biggest consequences out of everything. As we know, obviously, the social distancing has made travel restrictions possible, has made us not being able to hang out with family or friends as much as we want to. And it has had other consequences that probably were not really thought about in the beginning. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Right now. So one of the biggest consequences of this measure is the fact that some countries had to reinvent a little their healthcare system. Because as we know in the beginning, when people maybe were not paying as much attention to the rising of this virus, hospitals starting to get really full and medical professionals starting to have to do a lot. So a lot of surgeries were postponed or even cancelled. It's really sad that some people were scared to go to the hospital and wouldn't get the treatments that they possibly needed as well. The education system was another sector that was really, really affected. As we know, schools started being closed, universities started being closed, and that had a lot of consequences. For example, international students started to go back to their home countries, myself included. And UNESCO estimates that around 900 million learners were affected. Over 100 countries imposed a nationwide shutdown of the educational facilities. And on the UNESCO website, I found a really cool graph that shows the evolution along time since COVID-19 started to appear in the world, the evolution of the closure of schools and universities in the world. So it's really cool to see they have this map. And if you go there, you can put it whatever day you want, and you'll see around the world where schools and universities were closed. And you can see, like right now at this point, where they are still closed, where they have started to open with some restrictions or not. It's really interesting. I'll leave the link down below because it's a map that obviously evolves a long time. So I'm not just going to show you. I might put here on the screen the one for the current day that will be editing this video, for example. So yeah, it's really interesting stuff. So I would advise you to go to this website and check it out by yourself. Some consequences I had not even thought about. For example, the rising in dropout rates. For some reason, I had not thought about that. Not every student has the technology to be able to keep up with online learning, which is really, really sad. So some of them possibly couldn't finish their degrees or their school year because of that. Also, something I had not really thought about is the fact that research that was not related to COVID-19 had to be postponed. And yeah, we don't really think about that, but you know, research is the fundamental. It's what makes um, evolution possible. And we didn't I I had not even thought about that, so it's pretty crazy. And obviously, like, something else I didn't know, but obviously makes sense, scientific conferences that were really important, where people that were really intelligent talk about things and talk with each other and develop ideas, that were also postponed. And scientific conferences where you could possibly find a job were postponed. I can't even imagine students right now that had ended their degree, and you know, they're probably thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to find a job with the world like this? So it's really complicated situations, as we know, and probably predicted. The agricultural sector was also really affected, because when restaurants and hotels started to close, obviously there was no need for as much food as before, or as much ingredients and other stuff, so the prices dropped by 20%. And that is saying a lot, because for example, people that work in agriculture can sell an apple for like 20 cents. And if you go to the supermarket, they will be sold by a lot more. They will be more expensive. So sometimes these agriculture people that work to make these products, they don't win that much. They don't gain that much money. So now I cannot even imagine how much they were affected by this. And you know, exportations and importations reduced, so they were probably affected by that as well. They had too much product and couldn't sell it, and they probably had to throw a lot of things away because they just couldn't sell it and it would rotten for sure. So that is really sad as well. In the pharmaceutical sector, certain ingredients couldn't be transported around the world, so there was a lack of certain medicine at some point, which could have been a really big issue. I'm not sure how big of an issue it was. I haven't really heard anything from it again. I think I've heard something about it in April. I haven't heard anything about it since, so I don't know if it was fixed. I'm sure by now things are better. But yes, a lot of these ingredients came from China, so I'm assuming maybe this was more affected in the beginning of this pandemic than it is now. So now I'm just going to mention some other consequences of this pandemic, but in more of the general population, like how did it affect the general population and not a particular sector. So as we know, unfortunately, suicide rates start going up because of this enormous effect that this pandemic had on the world's economy. Mental health issues obviously started going up. Domestic violence was an issue that got harder to solve because the victims couldn't leave their house, they could not report their aggressors, and that's an issue that got worse, unfortunately. Unemployment went through the roof during this time, which is really unfortunate, and all these problems are related because a lot of people that lost their jobs unfortunately committed suicide because they just couldn't see how they would survive this time without a job. And obviously other health conditions were not looked at as much because of this pandemic. So as I said before, people were afraid to receive treatments in the hospital because they did not want to get contagious with COVID-19. A lot of surgeries were postponed, and obviously that's going to bring a lot of issues to other people. Something else that I always kept remembering is the amount of people that probably weren't diagnosed with something that they had during all this time because they couldn't just go to the hospital like that. So people finding out that they have something too late is something that boggles my mind. Like, imagine if they could have found out sooner if this hadn't happened. So it's something really sad to think about, unfortunately. As we know, economic vulnerability is associated with anxiety and the rise of mental health issues. And that's why we have seen these two things rise so much during this pandemic. This paper that I read made a study in the UK, in Spain, and in Italy. And it concluded that around 42.8% of the population from these countries is at risk of getting somehow some of these types of problems. So either with mental health, anxiety, depression. So it's really a high percentage, unfortunately. So due to this virus, online shopping increased a lot, as we know. as well as gaming. And healthcare workers, I must say, also were really affected by this pandemic, not just because they had to work long hours, but because they had to endure being harassed by certain people, and not just health workers, but also essential workers that work in the supermarkets or in big companies. They had to endure a lot of people yelling and not respecting the rules, unfortunately, and had to work a lot of hours. And this takes a toll on someone, really. And even those people that still had their jobs and now had to work from home were very affected, even mentally, from the situation because, for example, people with kids now had to help them with online schooling and learning. Some people don't even have that much space, so they cannot even separate their private life from their work life. And sometimes people would feel guilty for being home working and would feel they were not working enough. So they would just work longer hours in order to make up for the hours that were lost of not working. And it's really complicated for someone who is not used to work at home to just now have to start to do everything from home, because that's your home, that's your comfortable place where you can relax, but now it's part of your job, it's part of your day-to-day. You just spend your whole day there working, and you gotta take care of your children, you gotta clean your house. There's a lot you have to do, so that also takes a lot in your mental health. I found a really interesting graph that indicates the mood of people, or their hope levels throughout the different stages of a pandemic. So I hope you find it interesting. I really found it was interesting how the optimistic feelings or the unsure feelings of someone kind of fluctuate around a situation like this. As we know, the second country to be more affected by this was Italy in the beginning. And I thought it was interesting if I told you why that might have been. That Italy started to allocate or spend less money in the healthcare system from 2010, so after the Euro crisis. And that might have had an effect on the future. Also, they are one of the countries that have the lowest intense care units per 100,000 inhabitants. They also have one of the oldest populations in the world. And something else that I thought was like maybe a bit subjective is the fact that elderly people hang out a lot with younger people. So yeah, this might have been some of the reasons why Italy was so affected by the virus right away. Also, they are a country that receives a lot of tourism, so that might be it as well. That is not included in this paper, but I'm just saying it makes sense. So now I'll be talking about Europe more and the measures that they took in order to solve or reduce the impact of the pandemic in the Europe's economy. So Europe pledged a 1.7 trillion euros package in order to reduce the impact of COVID-19 in the European countries. The European Central Bank announced a 750 billion euro purchase program in order to stabilize the euro during this pandemic and possibly bring more strength to it in the future, and to help some businesses in their own countries. For example, Germany allocated around 50 billion euros, Italy 25 billion euros, Spain 200 billion euros, France 345 billion euros, and the UK 330 billion euros, I think, as well. So the paper that I took this information from does a more in-depth study of Japan, China, the US, and the UK. So if you're interested, you can give it a read. According to the UN Department of Social Economical Affairs, the world's economy was reduced by 0.9% from the expected growth of 2.5%. So yeah, that's a big difference right there. So in the 21st century, there has been a rise of the occurrence of epidemics and pandemics. And several scientists have been warning governments for a while that they should take measures and preparative measures to prevent something like this from happening in the future when a deadly virus comes. So they are actually predicting a more deadly virus to eventually come, and they have been warning governments for a while now. So it's kind of like not so bad that COVID doesn't have a death rate that is really high. Obviously, this has been a awful situation, but it could have been a lot worse. And I actually started to watch a documentary, I think is on Netflix, and it's about COVID-19, where the scientists that I'm not sure how often they do this, but they often check upon some bats that have this virus is on them, because bats are natural hosts of some of these viruses, and they are, we can say, asymptomatic to symptoms, so they are not affected by these viruses living in them. And they actually have found COVID-19 previously, but they didn't think it would be such a big deal. Obviously, what we are seeing right now is not that exactly virus, but a mutated version of the virus that they had found previously. So yeah, that's just a little bit of perspective there. And different countries took different approaches or started to act upon or started to do something earlier. Some countries on the center and west of Europe, because they started to act earlier, they also started to recover much earlier. However, Sweden is a very different case. They decided to take a different approach and not be so strict on their travel restrictions and social distancing measures. And so far, I must say that that strategy has not proven to be that effective in terms of their economy or the number of deaths or number of infected. We'll see how it is on the long run, because their objective is to acquire 40% of community immunity. But so far, they have a death rate that is higher than some countries that obviously did not take that approach, and their economy has been equally affected. For a country to start to reopen their economy and to start having people working again, it has to meet certain requirements. And we hear a lot on the news about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. So I would like to explain that a little bit from the paper that I've read. I know there are some differences sometimes between certain papers, but I'll get the gist of it, more or less, of what these phases mean. Obviously, phase 1 was the first of all. We had to be social distancing, we had to be in our homes, leave as least as possible, try not to be in contact with anyone unless it was an emergency. And yeah, I think most countries are now in phase 2, where the economy has slightly started to reopen. And for that to be possible, the country has to meet a certain criteria. Obviously, at the end of the day, the people that rule the country are the ones that decide. So if they want to listen to the scientists and what they say, they can choose to not reopen or to reopen. But if they just want to reopen, they can also do that, which is unfortunate. As we know, some countries are reopening and starting their economy again, even though they do not meet the criteria that I'm going to state. For countries to go to phase 2, they would have to have a sustained reduction in new cases of COVID-19 for at least 14 days. Hospitals have to be able to treat all patients that require hospitalization without resorting to crisis standards of care. They have to be able to test everyone that has COVID-19, and they have to be able to track everyone that has been in contact with someone that was infected with COVID-19. So these are the requirements for the economy to start to be opened again. Some schools and some businesses can also reopen at this stage, and only 50 people are allowed in gatherings. After this, it comes, phase 3 comes, and I'm sorry to tell you, but this phase can only come when there is a vaccine, or when the people that rule your country decide so. But technically, and according to scientists, it would only be wise to do so when there's a vaccine out there. Global restrictions can be lifted and travel can start to somewhat go back to normal. Then we have phase 4. And phase 4 is about studying the situation we have lived, we have faced, and start to develop ways we can prevent this from happening again in the future. And this time the studies would be really focused on studying the effects that this pandemic had on the tourism sector and how they could be prevented in the future. Because I don't want this to be such a depressing video, I would like to state some of the positives that COVID-19 has brought up to the world. So creative levels have gone up in order to fight boredom. Obviously, that's subjective as well. I'm sure some people don't feel that way. They feel like they've just been lying around, not doing anything. But in general, people have been more creative, and we've seen a lot of creative things online, which is always nice to see and to cheer someone up. Old aircrafts from some airlines have been replaced, which is great. I like to travel on things that work fine, so I'm happy to see that. Unnecessary travel has been reduced. We have now realized that sometimes maybe we didn't need to go there to have this meeting. It was something quick. We could have just done it by Zoom or by Microsoft Teams. So yeah, I'm sure that will be reduced in the future. I hope so. Sometimes we really don't need to waste money on gas or anything else just to travel and have a meeting. But I am of the opinion that sometimes you just need to be present. You just need to be face to face to have a meeting. There's just things that it's not the same thing. But yeah, there's certain things you don't need to meet. Just video chat each other and talk about it. The rise in cycling and other outdoor activities, it's been crazy. Cycling companies cannot even keep up with the demanding of bikes anymore. People are just buying like crazy, and that's good. We all like exercise is good. Exercise, start biking if you like it. That's also great. Start doing other stuff you enjoy. Maybe this is a great time to actually find out what you really like to do in terms of exercise. The hair starts to get clear. The water starts to get more clear as well. And the emission of greenhouse gases started to be reduced as well, because the world just stopped. Things, factories stopped, the traffic stopped immensely. So obviously the climate was going to get better. The thing is, even though it did get better, if things just go back to normal, all the progress that was made during this time would go to waste. And I don't think that's something anyone wants. So governments have to take action, have to do measures in order to take advantage of this thing that happened that somehow benefited the climate. We saw the images. It was crazy, the difference in the air, in the water, in some cities. So something has to be done, and I hope something is done. And even if not just about this, but about future plans to prevent a pandemic that can be more deadly. Things have to be done. And something else that is really important as well is communication. Communication is key. Governments have to speak with the public, and I understand sometimes they can't say everything, but they have to communicate. They have to tell what's going on to their country, what's going on, what's the situation, what are we going to do. There has to be trust between the people and the people that rule the country they live in. And I know that's been really tricky around the world lately. And I don't know how it's going to get better, but I just hope it does. About how the economy is going to get back to itself. As I said, many countries have made similar plans, and they have allocated some money for businesses. And other stuff has also been done, but I hadn't had much time to research into it. There isn't much information about it. There's a lot of papers that go into detail about a certain sector or about certain countries. So for me to do a world overview, I would have to read all of those and compile it into one, which I might do in a different video, but I just didn't have time to do it in this particular video. But something that I did see is how can companies kind of start to recover from this? And one way might be through partnerships or to start to cooperate with each other. That might be a good idea. I've also seen a lot online about people saying, why can't we just print more money? And that's not that easy. That's not something that could be easily done. Right away, the first thing, I don't know a lot about the subject, but right away I can think that if you can just print money whenever you want, then money will lose its value. So you might have a lot of money, but if you can just print it, who cares? If you can just print it, you don't need money at the end of the day. So it's not that easy. than just printing money. But I do understand where people come from, and I don't know if somehow it is possible for that to happen, for a certain amount of money to be printed and be allocated for certain areas, and then an amount of that money to be saved um, to help develop the world's economy. I think I read something about this in one of the papers. I don't know how and if that's even possible. So take that with a grain of salt. I just thought it was funny to mention it because a lot of people do think about that. Yeah. So yeah, guys, that's all I have for you today. If you liked this video, if you thought it was helpful, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to see more of this content. Please give me suggestions down below of anything else you want me to research about and do a video about. I have some themes on my notebook that I would like to research, but I'm open to any suggestions, really. And I hope you like this video, and see you on the next one. Bye.